Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mind Blown Zone episode 24. This one is called Victim Mentality. Ever felt like the world's always against you, like you're trapped in an endless loop of misfortune? That is the victim mentality. So many of us feel like victims these days, and there's a great explanation as to why. All establishment institutions are fundamentally tasked with deceiving the masses into feeling like victims. Media, government, Hollywood, you name it, it is their prime directive. Because when we agree to feel like victims, we give our power away to them. In fact, they gain all their power by convincing us to give our power away to them. Here's an alternative. Change your attitude from I am a victim to I am in control. Wake up and say, I am no longer a victim. I'm taking control of my life, and watch your world transform. How you doing, Brad?
Bang. Never better. And yourself this fine day.
Doing very well. Just got to Moscow, Russia.
Beautiful. Sunny and green, I hear.
Yep. When I left, it was basically winter, and when I returned to the exact same street and apartment, it's like luscious green, beautiful weather.
Gotta love it. I hope to get over there someday. Interesting place with a lot of history, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, worth checking out. So you ready to talk about victim mentality?
Let's do it. What do we got today?
Well, we thought it'd be best to start off with some definitions, just to be clear what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. So
Perfect.
I'll just read off the basic Wikipedia definition just to give some context. Victim mentality is an acquired personality trait in which a person tends to recognize or consider themselves a victim of the negative actions of others and to behave as if this were the case in the face of contrary evidence of such circumstances. And there's just another part on that entry where it says, in the most general sense, a victim is anyone who experiences injury, loss, or misfortune as a result of some event or series of events. Now, I think you wanted to be clear about what we're not talking about as well, Brad. Do you want to make that clear as a preface?
Well, yeah, just to be clear, we're not talking about, crime and abuse or anything related to those concepts today, right? We're talking about more generalized things than that. So just want to make that clear that and we'll get into some of the aspects of what people feel a victim of above and beyond those in this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Now, what we're about to list is, what people identify as being victims of these days. But I think maybe it might be good if you just give some context, Brad, about why we would even want to talk about victim mentality. What are we observing in reality that makes this a relevant topic for people to be aware of?
Well, you crushed it in the opening there, and what I think what we want to make clear in this podcast is that the forces that appear to be in control, by this I mean major institutions, are making a concerted effort to ensure the vast majority of us feel victimized, and it isn't accidental. They are assuredly not trying to empower us. They're actually trying to make us feel like victims, and the reason is that when you feel like a victim, as it was said in the opening, you give your power away to somebody you think can help you out of your victimhood, and that, of course, would be an expert or an authority or institution that has all this power and all this knowledge to help you not feel worried or victimized. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think it'd be good if, as we go through what this list of what people identify as being victims of, we could actually tie it into that contextually.
Sure.
That'd be quite effective. For example, this first one we've got here, socioeconomic status. Well, you mentioned, we look to a higher power, well, just a powerful entity, let's say, for help out of the victimhood, and that would be the government, right? The government's like, okay, you identify as a socioeconomic victim. Okay, we're your solution. We got the help, right?
That's right, and that's communism at the core. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to say on socioeconomic victimhood mentality? Do you want to
No, no.
mention more as we go through?
Well, I think that's it, right? Either you're in a
clear.
social class that's not the majority. You can feel like a victim, like you're not part of the main group, main social class in your neighborhood or region. And of course, economically, you can feel like a victim. Like you can't do what the rich people can do, for example, because of your economic status, and you're just a victim. Right? It was because of your upbringing or your education or whatever, whatever life threw at you, that you can feel a sense of victimhood that you don't have the economic status of a wealthy person, for example. So, me some other examples.
Racism.
Yeah. Well, that's the victimhood number one of the day, being pushed by the media, of course. They've been doing that for about a decade in full force. And obviously, the amount of, anybody who's, I would say, anybody who's paying attention, using their own mind and intelligence, would say to you that, racism is 1,000 times better than it was 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 80 years ago, 100 years ago, right? We've made dramatic improvements in that area as a humanity. And yet it's something that the media wants to remind us of 24/7 by 365 for literally the past decade, that it's getting worse and everything's horrific. And of course, they've got the bad guy demon, as the whites and the white man as the only one who can be racist. And it's really crazy. It's what it is. But they got a lot of people believing them that are paying attention. That's for sure.
Right.
What do you think?
And I think what you've raised here is the media telling us that we're victims of specific things. Right. Like usually when people are empowered, people are empowered, people who come from whatever socioeconomic class or whatever race, say, oh yeah, those things don't matter. And yet the media is constantly blasting out
right.
endlessly. Okay, if you're in this category, you're a victim. Things are bad for you and unfair.
Right. Thanks to you and me. We're the perpetrator, you and me specifically. Right. As in our gender, our sex, and our color, we're the only ones that are racist. And everyone else is a victim to us. That's what the media is saying constantly. And they're, of course, insane, but it's a topic for another day.
So those ones are kind of classical victim mentality things, but the next ones we've got are pretty interesting. Okay, we got germs.
Yeah.
Okay, victim of germs. All right, like everyone understands when we talk about like, a victim of race or a victim of socioeconomic status, but a victim of germs. What do you reckon about that one, Brad?
Well, Cootie's 1984, the last 3.5 years. And it looks like they're trying to ramp it up again here in, late summer 2023. The media is talking about a new variant, their boogeyman virus. So obviously that creates a tremendous feeling of victimhood. And it obviously did for the 3 years leading up to this point as well. Right? How many victims were there out there? Billions, huh?
Mm-hmm. And I think the things were, my life was going okay, but then because of COVID,
right?
For example, the germ that's the germ of the day, right? Because of this particular germ, then my life went bad,
right?
But not everyone felt that way. Not everyone was like, oh yeah, my life went bad because of COVID. Only some people decided that, oh, my life went bad because of COVID. So that points to an existence of a general mentality that looks for particular things out there,
right,
that are the cause of problems.
Right. Exactly.
And similar to that, we've got genes. Right? Do you ever feel like you're a victim of your genes? Has the establishment health center of control or whatever told you that you have particular genes that cause your personally unwanted physical situation? For example, they say that there's a gene called the FAT gene, and if you have it, makes you fat. What do you think about that one, Brad?
Well, yeah, we've talked about this a couple times, and this is probably our fifth trip down gene lane. And to sum it up as simply as possible, they can't ever tell you, in other words, if I went into a gene testing lab and said, all right, test my genes, what diseases am I going to get in the future? They can't ever tell me that. They can only tell me after the fact that when I got such and such a disease, well, we see that you had the genetics for it. Right? They have zero predictive value. And of course, your fat gene, you've pointed out several times that you can have the FAT gene and not be overweight, or you can have the FAT gene and be overweight. So there's no predictive value in that either. So at what point does everybody throw out this gene thing as pure nonsense? Hopefully it's soon. What do you think?
Yeah, well, hopefully soon. And just to go deeper into the victim mentality side of it, you always find that people who are in bad health situations and then get out of it, then they're coming out with this message trying to tell people it's not your genes. It's not your genes. It's not your genes. But yet, there's this whole huge propaganda arm of the establishment that always tells you if you're in this situation, it's because of your genes. Okay. So this is like this victim mentality of believing that there's these things out there that cause your situation. It kind of it kind of maintains the situation. But you always note that when people get out of the situation, they always suddenly let go of that mentality.
It has to be. There's no other explanation for it. That's right. If you want to blame your circumstances on something else out there, there's always a candidate for you. Agree?
Yeah. Well, here's a candidate: advertising and marketing.
Yeah, I mean, it's how we could do 50 hours on that topic alone, right? But that's what's happening with so many products and services, is that we know you're a victim of this, or if you have this situation in life, right, it's not your fault. We can help with our product or service.
Right? Oh yeah, you were taking that angle that advertising and marketing play on victim mentality. Yeah, this is so true. Like, oh yeah, it's just I've had a lot of experience in marketing, and a lot of the ways you think about it, when you're getting taught how do you do marketing, is you think, what do people say their problems are, and then you repeat that back to them. Okay, they think that they're in this particular problem because of that, and you say, oh, are you in this particular problem because of this thing, this other thing?
Right. It's exactly.
And one of the sins of marketing, if you want to do bad marketing, then go and tell people that it's because of something in their own lives that they're not taking responsibility for. You want to have an enemy. You want to throw stones at their enemies. That's like one of the classic marketing thing. Like, find their enemy and blame their problems on their enemy. This is what people are doing to people all the time. Marketers it's unethical. They're doing it all the time.
Right. It's the most effective technique. No doubt about it. And it's all wrong, of course.
And I think another angle that we were actually intending here is that people actually identify as victims of advertising and marketing. For example, the reason, we're in this health situation these days, so rising health problems in this category, that category, is there's so much advertising and marketing telling us to eat unhealthy foods. I mean, that if that is so absurd to blame personal, the responsibility for making choices on the fact that other people told them what to do.
Yeah, that's taking it to another level for sure. Ironically, just to build on that a little bit, I think only in the United States, our pharmaceutical industry is actually allowed to run television ads for drugs. I don't think you can do that in Australia. I'm pretty sure they can't. And
no,
you get an opportunity to watch some of our big pharma ads. It's I about fell out of my chair when they came up with this new disease called restless leg syndrome about, 15 or 20 years ago, and started marketing a drug for that particular syndrome. But that's effectively what they're doing, is they're talking people into it. Yeah, every now and then my leg bounces around a little bit, so maybe I do have restless leg syndrome. And boom, down to the the doctor to get a prescription and they're on a new drug that does who knows what. But that's, to me, that's one classic example from pharma for sure.
So something else people identify as being a victim of, parents.
Sure.
Parents and
Yeah.
education kind of go together, these early life influences. And I mean, it's understandable in a way that you would think this way, right? Like that's the facticity of things here. I did receive this information from parents and education, teachers, and so forth. But
Right.
a lot of people did. A lot of people received all the wrong information as well. And it's like whether you want to identify as a victim of it or not.
That's right. Right. A child up to the age of 7 is just kind of like a blank slate, right? It's like a unwritten on whiteboard. So they're absorbing all the things they get taught from, by their parents and siblings and, kindergarten, first grade, second grade teacher, even third grade teacher. But that's all, they're just taking all that in like a sponge. So sure, if someone had a bad parents, bad teachers, bad neighborhood, et cetera, that can definitely leave an imprint for sure. But the victim mentality part is where you say, well, here I am now, I'm an adult and I see all the negativity and all the unnatural and wrong things that were done to me or taught to me or that I saw. But you have the power as an adult to begin to let that stuff go, right?
Right.
That's where you take charge and take control and say, I see what went wrong. I see what shouldn't have been. And, you identify it and take steps to eradicate it from your life as best you can.
I mean, I think what's shaping up here is there is the existence of these things, these things that might make things difficult. But the victim mentality itself is separate from that. It's like you can have a victim mentality about all this stuff, or you can not have a victim mentality.
Right. Right. So COVID's all, we'll use that example for the rest of our lives because everybody in the world went through it. But, like you were saying earlier, some people felt they were a victim of COVID and they had to do this, they had to do that. They had to get a shot. They lost their business and all these other things, right? They felt like they were a victim, but they could have handled those things differently if they did not have that victim mentality. So all those things could have been handled in other ways. You didn't have to look too far outside of, kind of mainstream normie resources to find ways around those things. And just to be clear, I consider COVID situation to have been a blessing for me because I learned some, a lot of new things, especially around health and law in those 3 years. So, as much as I did not enjoy the masking and the closed businesses and restrictions and so forth, I saw those as a minor nuisance compared to the benefits that I got out of it. So just a personal story.
Even government here, being a victim of the government.
Yeah, that's probably number one on the list. We probably should have put that one first, huh? Like almost everybody feels in some way or another that they've been victimized by the government or the opposing political party, for example.
Sure.
Right.
The opposing party. Yeah. That's a good one.
That's probably where that factors in. But more and more people are starting to see, the financial situation, the currency, the Federal Reserve. More people are starting to see how that has been a cause of, inflation, which is them printing more currency notes than they should. And that's what makes prices go up. So more people are learning that. But that's a good example of how they feel victimized by the government. They can't afford what they used to be able to afford, thanks to irrational government spending.
Yeah. And again, there's this point that it's totally true. Yes, the government is stuffing things up. And well, not just the government, but government in league with subservience of people who give their power away to the government are creating this inflation. But the victim mentality, like things only go bad in your life due to those things if you have a victim mentality about them. If you don't have a victim mentality about them, things still go well.
You find a way, right? You find a way to make things work and they always work out.
Mm-hmm. One of the things we've got here is well, two things here that are kind of metaphysical. We have a cruel universe and being born a sinner. So these are kind of things that, like, you're not just a victim of specific identifiable things in reality, but the entirety of reality. It, you know, just being born into a universe that is victimizing you. I mean, oof, that's
Right.
rough.
That's
Or being born a sinner. Oh, geez, that's rough.
right. So the cruel universe one is an atheistic, materialistic view, right? Dog eat
Mm-hmm.
dog, survival of the fittest. You're just a random speck of consciousness that came out of the pond scum, and life eats life and destroys, and that's all part of life, and that's your own bad luck. Nothing you can do about it. That's that side of the equation. The other one, of course, is the Christian one where you're born a sinner. So you can't help but be evil and bad. You just have to atone and repent when you are. But you're going to continue to do it and do it the rest of your life. There's nothing you can do about it. So you're helpless. You're a victim that you just happen to be born a sinner. So that's
And it seems to me that these primary ones, this cruel universe victim mentality or born sinner mentality, these are kind of primaries. And then if you have those initially, like metaphysical victim mentality precedes victim mentality about specific identifiable things.
mm-hmm.
Do you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, that's right. It'd be at the foundation, right?
Yeah. Might be a good thing to ask yourself if you're listening and you do identify as, yeah, I'm a victim of this, that, and the other. Ask yourself, do you also believe that the universe is cruel, or that you were born a sinner, or have some other metaphysical victim mentality?
Right. That could be at the base. And think about, what if those weren't true? What if those two ideas weren't, from whichever perspective you're coming from? What if that
Mm-hmm.
isn't true? And the way that it's been, relayed to us. That's a good start.
Okay, then. So now what we want to look at is the behaviors that come out of victim mentality. Okay. So, number one behavior, I think, on this list is burying the head in the sand. Right. So, let's take the situation. Someone feels like a victim. They're saying, oh, I remember my life is terrible because of this, that, and the other. And then someone comes along and provides non victim mentality information. Oh, but look at it this way, look at it that way. And they don't want to hear it. Right. They like block the ears, bury the head in the sand. No, I know that's not true. That's foolish. That's like, it can't be like that. That's just, I don't want to consider that. I want to be a victim almost. What do you think about that, Brad?
Yeah, well, I mean, the movement between the two is a major existential shift. There's no doubt about it. Especially if this is the first time you're hearing any of these ideas, and you can say, well, this thing happened to me when I was 38, this thing happened to me when I was 27, and this thing happened to me when I was 15, and I was a victim in all these circumstances. And if you've gone all through life thinking that way, you're not going to, a single podcast isn't going to convince you otherwise, of course. But just beginning to imagine the possibilities that you weren't a victim in some of these situations, right? And hopefully we mention it later on in this podcast. We'll talk a little bit about the bad scenario that happened 10 years ago and your perspective of it versus today, for example. We've got that here somewhere. So if we don't, we'll bounce back to it. But that's a point I definitely want to make.
Maybe you could comment on these fight or flight and cognitive dissonance. They seem to go together.
Yeah, it's really, they're all one and the same, right? But when someone suggests to you that you aren't a victim and that you brought this situation on yourself, right? This is the fight or flight, of course, is that you want to the person either wants to fight you with, not physically normally, but, with arguments, or they want to make their points as to how they know they're a victim, or they want to get away from you as fast as possible. They don't want to hear anymore. That's burying their head in the sand. And cognitive dissonance is exactly that, right? When two beliefs can't live side by side, right? That you're a victim, you're not a victim. That tends to lead to the fight or flight response, right? And really an irrational fight or flight response. That's
Right.
just kind of that's the subconscious mind way of protecting somebody who's so firmly established in their victim mentality belief that they can't tolerate even for a second the possibility that it could have been something that they did
Mm-hmm.
to
So I
cause
mean,
their
these
circumstances.
three behaviors that we've listed out here: burying the head in the sand, fight or flight, cognitive dissonance. These are all kind of the behaviors in response to the suggestion that one is not a victim, right? And we have
Right.
some others here that are kind of like standalone. Just how does someone who has a victim mentality behave in general? This is an interesting one that you brought up, Brad. It's called sympathy and empathy seeking. Why
Right.
don't you explain that to us?
Well, it's a way to get attention, and it's good attention to get when you can leverage other people's sympathy and empathy for your plight. So that can become an addiction in a way, right? It can become addictive. We talk about this a little bit in Germanisch Heilkunde, how some people you shouldn't cure them of their particular disease because it's become a part of their identity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's for them to lose that, they lose their identity, which can really bring on some crazy existential problems. So if it's in other words, if you've been a person who's been disabled in some way for 50 odd years or whatever, right? They've become accustomed to the people, their caretakers and their lifestyle and all the things that they can and can't do and people that help them, such that to become fully independent and not needing any of this assistance, sympathy, empathy from others would be but too great a shock to them. So they're better off in the position that they're in. But some people do it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people literally cause problems for themselves. Maybe not consciously, but maybe consciously, but even just in the slight subconscious background, they'd look for ways to gain sympathy and empathy from other people due to their victim status. Make sense?
Yeah, and kind of as you were explaining that, I kind of noticed a deeper thing going on here. If the victim mentality implies this feeling of being at the effect in life, right? Like other things are causes, other things out there are having a negative influence or cause upon me, the effect, right? And this sympathy empathy seeking, that's kind of like a powerlessness thing where, well, if bad things cause my problems, if external things cause my problems, then I need to go out to other people and get them to do positive things to fix me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the same mentality. It's like the other side of the coin. Right. The victim mentality is those things cause bad things for me. And then the other side of the coin is, and I also want reality to cause good things for me.
That's right. This is following along nicely with our What Causes Disease podcast, right? This material outer effects and material outer cures goes hand in hand with this victim mentality, where it's something outside of me created my problem, therefore something outside of me will solve my problem, like the sympathy of others.
So we have this blame-oriented activism. So feminism, for example, but essentially what we're looking at here is leftism. And if you've listened to the manifesto by, what was the Unabomber guy's name? Ted Kaczynski, right?
Kaczynski, yeah.
Ted Kaczynski, right? So what he identifies in that is that leftism is not a political position, but a psychological position. And it's kind of what we're talking about here. It's this victim mentality, and it's this anger at the entirety of reality and blame and singling out specific groups or people or things in reality and directing that anger and blame towards them for the person's situation. That's what he says leftism is, and he says that like leftist governments are basically the the tyrannous gang that appeals to that and says, hey, vote us in so we can all direct our leftist energy towards the people we blame for our situation.
Right. And typically that's always wealthy corporations and individuals. It's a transfer of assets is what they're always after. Mostly to
this is like the
themselves.
Bernie Sanders kind of thing, right? Like, let's the 1%. We're gonna get the money back from the 1%. It's like rallying all the leftist victim mentality to blame certain people, and then
that's right.
Basically try to cause financial harm to those people,
right?
As some sort of revenge.
A lot of people duped too, remarkably.
Mm-hmm. Right. And
absolutely,
it's kind of are they duped or are they? Yeah, we know what's going on here. We're angry at you.
Right. I think we did the bonding one already. I did that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what we want to talk about now is like why, like we want to explain this victim mentality. We want to talk about why this victim mentality exists, how it comes to be, why it stays in place for people. So we've divided the cause up into external causation and internal causation. So external causation, it's kind of interesting because it's almost like a a spiral of reinforcement of victim mentality. Do you want to go through some of these, Brad?
Yeah, and you can sum all these up pretty easily, I think, by just saying that anybody who is seeking power, right? They can only generate, each one of us can only generate so much power for ourselves, right? There's a limit to how much power I can, as far as like controlling my life and what's in my realm. But the people who aren't satisfied with that have to move on to higher levels. And in order for them to get more powerful, they have to take other people's, and they don't really take it, but we've talked about this many times. They convince everybody else to give them their power. And so that summarizes this entire category here, right? We're bombarded by disempowering victim mentality messages, establishment institutions, right? They're training us to be disempowered, conversations with friends, interactions in movies and television shows. I mean, it's very deliberate, right? There's always some victim in all of these. Advertising, but they want us to come to believe that this is normal, this behavior that we see and learn from these big institutions. But it's normal in the sense that we've all been indoctrinated into it, but it's definitely not natural. So we are behaving unnaturally based on all this indoctrination. And that's what leads to most of the woes that people have in life.
Yeah. And you know what? This external causation that we're explaining here, like we're only going to spend a few minutes on this, but this is a big idea. And I would say that this is one of the main ideas that we present in the Take Your Power Back kind of manifesto in a way that's on the mindblowenzone.com. Basically, we talk about how the establishment institutions, yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Brad said, are the way they get their power is by convincing you to place your focus, your attention, your activity, your mind, your power, everything on things that just grow their reality, the reality that they want to create, right? So instead of you focusing your own energy, your own power on your own life, they convince you that you should do it and you should live in a way that just benefits them and disadvantages you. And that's the great dupe that is going on all over the world.
Right. The basic idea is that when you feel like a victim, that's fear. You're fearful when you're a victim, right? There's an element of fear. And anytime they know our psychology, ever since the days of Bernays, they figured this out somewhere between 1890 and 1920. Somewhere in that period, the psychologists of the time had figured out human behavior, like to a T. And they knew that in order for them to get us to give our power away, they had to keep us in fear. It's that simple. So a victim is somebody who is in fear. Always. Yes?
Oh yeah, the thing you reminded me there was this sales letter that was running really hot, a video sales letter that was running super hot for about a few years. I think it was on the scene around 10 years ago. It was all about the vampire fungus, right? So it'd be like, are you one of millions of Americans who experience these symptoms. And then it's like, it's telling you all these terrible things that like people have, like just a bunch of health symptoms. And then it's like, you may have what scientists are calling the vampire fungus, or what is scientifically identified as candida. Right. And people are like, oh no, oh no. Like they're playing on your fear. And then they convince you that you have candida, the vampire fungus. And then they're like, give me your money. And then we'll give you this little pill of nothing. And then you'll take it and your vampire fungus will be solved. I mean, that's what's going on here. Their victim mentality is based in fear. And people just come along and go, aha, so I see that you're weak here. You have this victim mentality. So let me just prey on that and let me make it so that the work that you've done to generate your money, instead of going to your own life, comes to me.
That's right.
That's what's going on.
Your energy and labor is your power, and you just handed it to them for some worthless pills. The big one going on right now is the flesh-eating bacteria. Did you see that one? That's just this week. There's a new flesh-eating it's waterborne. So you need to stay out of the water in August where it's hot, and like 80% of the population is out enjoying rivers and lakes and oceans. And you don't want to be anywhere near water where other people are swimming, because you might get a flesh-eating virus or bacteria. Sorry. So that's the hot one this week.
Right. And see, the good thing, being near water is good. It serves you. It makes you healthy. You feel good. Right. So if you stay away from water, well, you're going to feel worse, and then you're just going to fall into a negative spiral and do a bunch of disempowering activities.
There you go. Now, instead, you go home and watch their Netflix and play their video games, and right, isolate yourself and don't interact with anybody, and right, all to your detriment. Good times. Right.
So that's the external causation, but this external causation is only like a secondary causation. It cannot function. It has no power unless there's this internal causation. So we've identified a few things here where, how the victim mentality really gets started. We have noted that it is a disorder. It is something gone afoot, something gone wrong. Okay. And here are a few things that have gone wrong. One is hatred of the good for being the good. This is a concept identified by Ayn Rand. She's just trying to identify like what is one of the primary things going on with this kind of leftist psychological position. And she said it's not really envy, right? It's hatred of the good for being the good. It's when you're in school and you're bad at math, and then someone else is good at math and you hate them. Okay. It's when and because that being good at math is good, right? And it's something you want. It's when you identify having money as good, and then you don't have money, and then you hate someone who has money. So you identify what is good, like by you can inherently see things that are good, and then you see things that are people who have them and hate them, right? So that's one of them. Any comment on that before we go to the next one, Brett? Which you can take if you like.
No, that's spot on. Keep going.
Oh, why don't you take outsourcing intellectual sovereignty?
Oh, okay. No, this was Ayn Rand's part-time
lover and protege,
collaborator and lover and protege, Nathaniel Brandon. Yeah, this was my favorite takeaway from his book that you recommended to me, which was this idea that we
Psychology of Self-Esteem.
That's right. We outsource our intellectual sovereignty, which is a fancy way of saying we set aside or ignore our own evaluation of the situation, and we let somebody who claims to be an expert fill in that gap for us. And you do that enough times for enough years, and pretty soon you can't form your own opinions. You can't come to your own logical conclusions without having some expert weighing in on the situation for you. So you effectively are making yourself helpless in many ways. And it's when the scary part is this realization, when that finally hits somebody that they shouldn't have rejected their intuition or their gut instinct or their thoughts about a particular subject in favor of an expert who was completely brainwashed and wrong. and they start to realize that. I think the term he used was they start to feel a sense of metaphysical worthlessness. That really jumped out of the book for me, right? In other words, they don't have a sense of self, worth and self-confidence any longer. And I'm sure
Right.
that's can be a pretty tricky psychological problem for that person, such that they
Yeah.
would prefer to go back to just relying on the experts. That's a safer space for them at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Well, I think this outsourcing of intellectual sovereignty, it's also like an abandonment of, as you said, confidence in your own mind to,
right,
to be rational and run your life, right? So you're abandoning your faith in yourself to run your life in the best way possible and outsourcing that faculty to other people. And that is really like giving, like it's like coming along and saying, yeah, I am not at the cause, right? I do not cause my own life. So that's kind of one of those core metaphysical things that just sparks this victim mentality when you don't believe that you're at the cause, that you're just at the effect.
right, right.
Determinism. I think determinism is pretty interesting here because determinism is almost like at the very, very basis of believing that you're at the cause, you're at the effect, right? If you believe everything's predetermined, if you live in a universe where everything's determined, well, what can you do? You don't have free will. So you are nothing basically. And I personally don't subscribe to that. I believe in free will. But if you believe in determinism, well, that's just like step one to victim mentality, in my opinion. But you might have some different things to say on that, Brad.
Well, that's a topic for another time. Tell the listeners what's the difference between determinism and fatalism. Can you distinguish between the two?
I know I haven't thought about the word fatalism.
Okay, let's keep rolling then. Just curious.
Okay. And we mentioned before this cruel universe mentality. Like even though we're not big fans of Einstein here, I think he said, you can decide if you live is the universe a friendly or a cruel place, right? It's a basic metaphysical question. And if you believe that the universe is a cruel, unfriendly, hostile place, well, that's kind of like the name of the game here with victim mentality.
100%.
I think you could probably go through these end results. Like everything we've talked about here, what is the real result here of the victim mentality?
Right. I think, ultimately you can bucket it into this idea of just existential fear. Right? In other words, your existence, right, is buttressed on all sides with some form of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because there's always something out there to get you when you're a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And we've rattled off a bunch here, and there's a million more ideas out there that people can carry around with them. Of course, when you're in fear, we wrote loss of control here, but it's giving away your power, right? You actually want somebody else to control things for you because you're a victim, and of course you're powerless. Right? This is the ultimate, the deepest state of victim mentality is powerlessness. There's nothing I can do to get out of this situation I'm a victim of. And that almost ensures you're going to stay in the situation because you feel powerless. Yes?
Yes. Anything else to mention before I just add one thing in?
Well, I'm just moving down the list here, but feel free to go ahead.
No, you continue. I'll pop it in at the end.
One of the hallmarks, I think, of this is what people will say, I'll finally feel good when those people, whoever they are, the politicians, the doctors, the opposite political party, the ruler in another country, the sheriff, the local, governor, mayor, whatever, I'll feel good when those people or that situation changes. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to feel good. In other words, I can't feel good until something that I can't control changes outside of me. Think about that for a second. I'm going to choose to feel bad I'm going to choose to feel bad until somebody out there makes a change that I want. That's the definition of powerlessness.
Right. And that's when someone comes up and says, you can just feel good now. And then it's like, oh, you're just a woo-woo idiot.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's where the cognitive dissonance usually kicks in, right? The cog dis, as we say, and they'll give you 1,000 reasons why they can't. But yeah, that's what I think the last bullet is exactly right. So attributing your problems, failures, misfortunes to external circumstances is the very definition of victim mentality.
Okay. And I think one thing we didn't put here is we didn't put judgment. Because, if we're talking about this hatred of the good for being the good, envy, this leftist psychological position, those seem to be very rooted in judgment. But you're kind of the expert on that concept, Brad, at least among us. So maybe do you want to talk about the role of, or the idea of judgment in relation to victim mentality?
Well, the word judgment, right? It's used multiple different ways. We got to be clear every time we use that word. It's not synonymous with discernment, which a lot of people will tend to, it's used often like that. Like, oh, you used good judgment today, and not, stepping out in front of the cars when, they were going too fast, right? That's discernment. Judgment is when you put a charge on something, when you say something's good or bad, right? So it's really an energetic charge. It's not an opinion. It's not a preference. It's saying you're looking outside of you and saying, this is bad. And that's when judgment issues out of your mind and being. So how do I relate that to victim mentality? I mean, it's, ultimately, and I'm hoping my story is in here. I'm sure it is. We'll get to that. But the act of judgment always makes things worse for you. Even when the situation, everybody agrees, this happened to you today, Matt, and it stinks, right? Nobody says, oh, that was wonderful that you had a 20-hour layover in some random airport and you had to sleep on the ground, right? No one's gonna say, that was great, man. That was fantastic. Why complain about that? But your ability to accept that situation somehow or another, it was for your benefit, even though you couldn't see it at the time. Maybe the plane you were supposed to get on turns out it had a mechanical problem and it crashes and kills 20 people or whatever, right? All because of the situation that led up to you having to have a 20-hour layover at the airport. Following?
Sure.
So, but if you judge the situation as horrible and awful and I'm miserable and I'm a victim of the flight schedule, right? You're taking yourself into the depths of what will later create more problems in your life. Is that what you were wanting me to go for there? I'm not quite sure whether I got to the spot.
And I think just as you were saying, and I just thought it's kind of like, in victim mentality, you're like, my life is bad because of that bad situation and those bad people, right? So it's like judgment towards self and judgment towards others. Just a layer of judgment over the whole of reality, almost.
Yeah. Double damage coming your way because of it. That's right.
Okay. So the non-victim mentality.
Yay, finally we got here. The last stuff's been so icky.
Yeah, get into it. I started to feel it. I was like, yeah, man, we're swimming in the mud right here. Right. So it is possible to not be a victim. Brad said the other day, remember a time when something bad happened to you, but you made some important life decision and it ultimately helped you. We can we can look back, sometimes 5 years earlier and say, you know what? It's probably a good thing that happened. But the pure non-victim mentality is kind of like that in the present for all things, right? Like everything is how it should be. Everything's good. Is that how you'd put it, Brett?
Yeah, and that's the story I kept hoping we'd get to, right? But everybody can do this. I've yet to talk to a person that, I'm not saying everybody can do it for every single event, but I'm saying everybody can look back at something that happened to them in their lives, an adult, maybe not a 5-year-old, but, all adults can say, you know what? when I was 13, this thing happened and it changed the course of my life. At the time, right, it was the worst possible thing that could have happened in my life, but it pointed me in this other direction, and I'm happy it did because it got me to where I am today. So this is an example of all things that are happening to you are ultimately for your benefit. If you can accept that idea, then you can begin to flow through life with a lot more ease and grace. Right. And I was going to make another point here. I lost it, but that is, it's not always easy to do. Certainly not in the heat of the moment, of course. Right. But if with a little bit of hindsight and perspective, you can look back at that situation and say, yeah, if that wouldn't have happened, then I wouldn't be here today. So while again, you can't look at all events and see that, everybody can find at least one situation like that where their life benefited because of this moment that they felt they were victim of an unfortunate circumstance. So yeah.
Right. Even if like you're eating an ice cream and you drop your ice cream, I mean, that appears to suck, but you can just buy another ice cream and then you've learned how to not drop an ice cream.
Right.
So now you're more careful in general. You're more in control of things that you're holding in your hand. Yeah. That's pretty good skill.
Maybe,
right?
It's a lesson in presence.
$5 to buy an extra ice cream. Yeah, lesson in presence, right?
Right. There's a saying in the, let's call it the esoteric metaphysical world, and it's a powerful one. And it's this: acceptance is the highest form of gratitude. So it's an advanced skill in relation to our normie indoctrination that we all got. But if we can come to accept what has happened to us, in other words, to be okay with just to be all right with what is in this moment, the more we can do that, the more life improves. Tough skill for a lot of people, right? But gratitude is the most constructive energy in the universe. Okay. Fear and judgment are the most destructive energies. Go ahead.
I've got some people who overcame difficult situations. You seem to know a bit of the backstory on a few of these people, Brad. So I'll mention the people and you tell us a bit about a few of the ideas here, okay? So we got Jim Carrey.
Oh, geez, I don't know if I really do. I think Jim Carrey was just poor for quite a bit in his childhood, right? Like he lived out of a car and, had a kind of a strange growing up, but was by no means socioeconomically advantaged as a child. Mm-hmm. So he obviously became a popular comedian and made jillions and jillions of dollars. So he didn't in other words, he didn't let it stop him from becoming financially successful. Right?
Right. So he didn't have any, I suppose he didn't have much property, but as I understand from what I've heard him say is that he would just stand in front of the mirror and just practice his facial expressions for hours, right? So that's a costless activity. So, if you have socioeconomic disadvantages, seemingly, that just means that your thing to do might be a thing that doesn't cost any money.
Right. Well, what he didn't
do. I can still turn in. Go ahead, bro.
Right. What he didn't do was say, I'm going to be poor the rest of my life because my dad was poor and my family was poor. So I was born poor. I'm always going to be poor. That's the victim mentality.
We got Schwarzenegger.
He's like the number one guy on the list. I mean, Schwarzenegger. I mean, just stop and think about what that guy pulled off, right? He, I think he was in the army in Austria, and he was, pumping some iron, and I think the story goes that he was, sneaking out of his barracks at night to work out because it wasn't, the military has your life structured from, big, dawn till dusk, right? They got you. So he would get up and sneak out. And of course, I think he snuck off base for like a weekend and went and won like Mr. Teen Austria or something like that. Right? He went AWOL, and he's like when he was 17 or 18 or something, and he got caught, and then he got reprimanded, and someone told him like, man, you should get a career in bodybuilding. You got the genetics or whatever, even though that genetics idea is something different. But anyway, long story short, he decides he's gonna pack up. He's got hardly any money and move to Los Angeles, right, Venice Beach, and start pumping iron. And obviously, look what the guy did. And probably a span of 7 or 8 years, he's still the face of bodybuilders today, right? No one's more famous than Arnold. And of course, he then, that wasn't enough for him. He then had decided that he was going to be a movie star, and he basically couldn't speak the language. He really still can't pronounce things correctly even to this day, right? And how in the world is he going to be a leading man in Hollywood movies with that accent of his? And of course, that didn't stop him. He just kept going, and next thing you know, he's the biggest movie star in the world. And that wasn't quite enough for him, though. So then he decides he's going to marry royalty in America, right? Which is basically the Kennedys, right? So he marries a Kennedy, which is all but impossible to do from the socioeconomic status and his lineage and everything. And then he's like, yeah, I think I want to become governor of the biggest state in the country, and pulls that off. And pretty remarkable story, to say the least. He shouldn't have been able to do any of those things beyond a successful bodybuilding career, basically. So incredible guy.
So I imagine there was someone who grew up in the same city in a similar economic situation to him, who just decided to be a victim and point the finger at the people whom they blame for their situation, right?
Sure. Yeah, you'll always find the opposite, in any one of these stories, for sure. Chris Rock, I think he's same story. He was poor from the Bronx, just a poor family, and nothing special about his upbringing, and just happened to dig his way out. I don't think I know much more about that. Tyson was an orphan, right? He was in a boys' home, right? Like a foster care or something. And I think Customato, I think, adopted him. I can't remember, but he had a terrible childhood from what I recall. And he
a lot of bullying, right? So
yeah,
I'm getting bullied, so I'm going to get so strong and such a good fighter that I can beat my bullies.
Right? Yeah. And he became obviously certainly the most exciting boxer to watch in the 90s. I would think of all time. I mean, it was a spectacle when he boxed. Someone we didn't put on this list was Herschel Walker. And you mentioned that, being bullied and weak. He was this little skinny. You know who Herschel Walker is?
I don't think so. It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it wouldn't take you long to Google him up. He's just like built like, a tank. He's just big, muscular, everywhere, just huge muscles. But he just decided he didn't want to get bullied anymore. I don't know, 7th or 8th grade. And he just decided he's going to do push-ups and sit-ups at every commercial break on his television. He, like a year later, he's like stronger than everybody in the state. And he was a great, he went on to the NFL and was a running back and everything. But anyway, that's enough on those guys. I think we made our point.
Well, I just mentioned Tom Cruise. I mean, I think one of the main things about Tom Cruise is that he's short, right?
Yeah.
And you can go online and find guys who are short and like, oh, man, girls don't like short guys. Like this is like never gonna get a girl.
Right.
There's an endless supply of guys who are short who are blaming their height. But he's like, well, I'm just Tom Cruise is like what, 5'6" or 5'7" or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like kissing Cameron Diaz or something. I don't know who. Did he kiss Cameron Diaz or something? Is that right?
I've never heard that.
Or is that
no?
Or is that No, I think I might have my people. I think I was watching Ben Stiller the other day.
Yeah.
There's a scene in Extras where he's like, I kissed Cameron Diaz. But Tom Cruise obviously is kissing supermodels, right?
Right.
So it's like victim mentality or non-victim mentality. It's a choice.
Always. Yeah.
I like this anecdote. One of your favorite anecdotes here, Brad, the Tony Robbins story of two boys.
Yeah, this is
perfect,
I think
really.
It is. It's a great story, and I think it comes from his book, Awaken the Giant from Within. It may be another book. I read a couple of them back in the day, but the story goes like this: there were two twin boys who were raised by a father, and I think when they were fairly young, 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that, their father went into a home to try to rob it, and got caught by the father, and he ended up murdering the whole family, wife, husband, and a couple of kids. And then he got caught, got thrown in prison. And devastating for the two little boys, obviously. And somebody tracked those boys down, I think in their mid 30s, early 40s, and interviewed them, and just asked them questions about their life. And one of the questions, so one of the boys was a success by mainstream standards. He had a big, beautiful home on the coast of California, and up on the cliff, and the wife and a couple kids, and driving Porsches and the whole 9 yards. And the other boy did exactly what his father did. He murdered a family, trying to rob them, and he was in prison. And twin brothers. And the questioner asked him, why do you think you turned out the way you did? The same question. And each boy gave the same answer. They said, how could I turn out any other way with the father that I had? So there's your difference between being a victim and being in control. The one boy obviously said, I'm never going to be like my father. And the other one said, I'm destined to be like my father. Good story.
Yep. Do you want to, we wrote these other two things down, but they're not so interesting. This example government perspective, I think, is interesting. How to not be a victim in spite, or not in spite, but just even given the fact that the government is how it is. Do you want to explain this one, Brad?
Well, yeah, this will go more to our, Know Your Rights podcast. But, the idea is to recognize who and what the government is. And in reality, the government doesn't exist. No such thing as the government. It's a fiction. It's just an idea, right? And even there's no such thing as an employee of the government. There are men and women who do work on behalf of this fictional entity, but they aren't employees of the government. But ultimately, the basic idea is that you, as a man or woman, right, have inherent natural rights, right? Unalienable. Not inalienable, unalienable rights. But the government, it's a fiction, so it has no rights. Can't. It's not real. That makes sense.
So it's interesting here, like, it's only a government if you think that they're governing you, right?
Right? You can go on to believe
they're certainly not
in
governing
a number
me.
of things. Right. Right. Those are two different mentalities.
Okay, so now we've covered all this content. I think we can go right back to the beginning, the introductory script about how the cabal is making us feel like a victim. So do you want to add some extra, finalizing information on that, Brad?
Well, just a reminder that the cabal, let's call this the group that's in control, the powerful group, whatever word you want to use to describe it, right? So just a reminder that, these things that they're using to make you a victim, germs, climate change, race, socioeconomic status, genes, etc., right? All these things are causing us to give our power to them, which makes them appear powerful. So that is their fundamental goal, is to get us to give our power away. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Because what does power do? Power builds reality, right? So everyone has some power. You want to use your power to build your own life, but if I can convince you to use your power to build my life, sounds like a pretty sweet deal for me, right?
Right. Build the world they want to keep you subjugated under, held down, right?
Right.
When you give your power away,
Right.
you let them make you less and less powerful.
Okay. So there's just a few things here written about taking your power back. Do you want to go through these, Brad? I think you mentioned most of these.
Well, sure. So, let's going back to the David Hawkins scale, which we've talked about many times, is scale of consciousness. I was suggesting that in order to break free from the victim mentality fully, right? We can do it in legs and segments, right? Little by little. You don't have to break out of it all at once, especially if you've been in it all your life. It's not, you're not going to just shake it all off after a day. But that level of consciousness that needs to be reached is a fairly high level, and it's in the 350 to 400 range. Recall the 200 range is the courage level, where I have some courage to take back control, and that's the level where I can begin to distinguish truth from falsehood. And this 350 to 400 level, he called it acceptance. And if you recall earlier in the podcast, I said that gratitude or acceptance is the highest form of gratitude. And as he says, this is where you integrate taking action as the creator of your life. You begin to let go of victimized beliefs and push yourself to reach your goals. So pretty interesting. And I think that's pretty doggone accurate. So that's a level that can be, people can strive to reach that and see where they're at and see what parts of their life that they can't accept, they don't accept, or they feel the victim of, and they can, find ways to work on seeing those things in a different way. Another point that I made here was you really can't take your power back if you continue to refer back to the past and say, yeah, well, this situation is why I am the way I am today. It's because of this thing that happened to me 30 years ago. It's kind of like scratching a scab off of a wound that hasn't healed all the way. And that you just keep basically bringing the past back to your present and kind of reigniting it, like starting that wheel over again. I'm going to roll through this feeling of victimhood that I had when I was, 15 years old. I'm going to keep going over it and over it. So that's a big mistake, referring back to the past and what went wrong back then that you feel is still affecting you today. One of the things I talk about often is like, what can we do about this when people are faced with this idea that there's a controlling cabal? A big thing is to stop participating in the offerings from the establishment. And that is obviously their big giant institutional offerings. The more you can stop participating in those and holding those up and building them up, then the faster that the edifice of their power falls apart. That makes sense?
Oh, yeah.
I guess I got a Brad note here. So what did I say here? I'm just going to read it out. It says, you can go listen to somebody give tips, exercises, products, guidance, etc., on how to shed your victim mentality. Right. So you can make it into a big process, or you can simply choose right here, right now, that you don't want to be a victim any longer. It's just an intention. So you can actually make that intention. And I just gave a couple simple examples. I am in control of my reality. It's just an intention. I intend to be in control of my reality. Or another one would be, I have the power to shape my reality. And it's very, very different from being a victim. But just learning to get these positive, productive, constructive, optimistic, hopeful, positive thoughts into our head, starting to say those, that becomes our mental chatter in the monkey mind, things will start to change. So that is my basic advice on how to shake off victim mentality. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, and just on those affirmations, I'd recommend, if you're here right now, might as well just say them. I am in control of my reality. I have the power to shape my reality. Just say them to yourself a few times. And with that, I think we can just mention take your power back. I think what's amazed me as we've gone through this victim mentality is how much victim mentality is tied into disempowerment. It's almost like it almost goes hand in hand. Like the more, like it's almost like the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you're a victim, you definitely want to take your power back. And therefore, you definitely want to watch our video on taking your power back on the mindblownzone.com. It's all over the site. It's probably below this video if you're watching if you're watching this podcast on the mindblownzone.com. And I think in general, if you've only been watching our videos on, social media or something, pop over to the mindblownzone.com and see what we've set up there, because it's a one hell of a website, I'll tell you. Beautiful. Anything else you want to mention on Take Your Power Back, the course, Brad?
Yeah.
How it ties into victim mentality?
Yeah. I'll just say, the point that I was making there at the end about taking some elaborate exercise and product and, going through, counseling and all these other things, it's not about learning new things as much as it is about experiencing what it feels like when you say, I have the power to shape my reality. And it's so the Take Your Power Back course is very much experiential versus intellectual. Right. And it's the intellectual place where these beliefs live. They do need to be rattled loose, these victimhood beliefs. But the course is about changing the way you interact with and experience the world. And that's the power of it. So that's all I got, Matt.
That's a big difference in our course compared to other, let's call them self-development or empowerment courses. That ours is not just information, ours is experiential. So when you go through that course, you will experience being a non-victim, being an empowered person. You will experience it. You will go there so many times that you will remember how it feels to go there, and you'll begin to have the power to just be there.
That's the idea. 100%.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Brad. And thank you,
Thank you,
everybody, for
Matt.
watching.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to everybody popping into our next podcast.
It's going to be a good one. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.